Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar presented by Starboard Consulting. We have a fantastic 1-hour conversation and demo today, Maximo Spatial Lessons Learned with some of our top experts. So leading today's team will be Amy Tatum. Amy, welcome. Thanks so much for leading the discussion.
Hey, Alex. Thank you. Appreciate you introducing us and happy to be here today and be joining everybody online that's here to learn a little bit more about spatial. So I'm Amy Tatum. I'm with Starboard Consulting. Starboard's an IBM business partner and implementer. We do a lot of work with spatial. Historically, a lot of our clients have been utility companies with a lot of in-ground assets, pipes and wires and things. And with that, we've built a deep expertise in spatial over the years. Got a couple of my spatial experts on our team that work with me a lot here at Starboard. So first off is Lani Trotter. Lani's one of our senior functional leads. Lani, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Lani Trotter. Yes, and I work at Starboard Consulting. One of my favorite things to work on around Maximo is spatial. Been with the company almost 9 years, and enjoy working with Tom and Amy on these projects. Looking forward to speaking a little bit more with you about it. Tom, you want to introduce yourself?
Certainly. I'm Tom Coulombe. Technical lead with Starboard Consulting, and I've been with Starboard for, since 2013. So going on just past 8 years. I've been working with Maximo since I got out of college in 2005. And
come on now, you're making the rest of us feel old.
I know, right? Well, I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm old, preparing for this, you go through some of our use cases and you're like, whoa, like I don't remember doing that. And then here it is. Right.
Been a while. It's been a journey. Yeah.
So, so spatial's been definitely a fun one to learn. There's a lot of aspects to it. So hopefully we can share some insights in that today.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks, Tom. So what is Maximo Spatial? So obviously Maximo, it is the built-in map view of what we know and love as our assets and locations and our work orders and service requests. The concept around spatial is to allow the user within the Maximo application to also have that rich view of geographic display and layout and routes and symbology of these assets in a visual way. So it really has all the power of GIS and all the power of Maximo to understand all those data relationships, any patterns and trending things that folks use GIS for. Can be merged with your Maximo data to make that even more understandable and insightful.
Good explanation, Lani. And a couple of things strike me with spatial. One, I've been working with Maximo long enough to remember the days before spatial was even a thing. And one of the first utilities I worked with, we had map books. They had all the paper maps that you went to the field with, and the crews would just kind of mark those up over time. And every now and then it was a big production to reprint all those maps and take them out with you just to know where things are. But with those books, I mean, even if you got physical location of your assets, you never had that trending and visualization of, work by priority and status and the dynamic nature of the maps. So you're getting that in spatial at a desktop level is great, but nowadays, even just getting that, on your phone and being able to take it with you wherever you go is really made a difference for a lot of our clients. It's a really cool thing.
It sure has. And Amy, I think we have a demo of spatial that we were going to try to share. Can you step us through that today?
Yeah. So let me share my screen here. All right. Should I see that? Oops. I lost my demo again. I'm going back to the wine. Here we go. All right, so this is just a little snippet demo that hits some of the highlights of spatial. So I'll just kind of play through this and talk over it a little bit. And if you guys want me to pause on anything, I can certainly do that. But I'm starting off here in the assets application. And I just will come in and do a quick little query on asset tag. I'm going to search for sewer mains and get a list of assets that will come up there. And I can go over to the map tab. And what's going to happen is this main that I'm at is going to display here on my map. And I can see it there highlighted in pink with the little kind of turquoisey colored pen on it, showing me exactly where in the world that particular chunk of main lies in my map. And as I scroll through the record set, my map will automatically shift and move to whatever asset that I'm looking at. So I've got a bunch of map tools up here. As I scroll through those, I've got a base maps here. I've got an edit tool. I've got a locator tool, identify. And I'll pull a couple of these up as we go through, but all the toolbars can be enabled with securities. So if I want some users to edit and not others or things like that, I've got security group privileges that I can tie to any of these tools. So if I look at my identify tool, I'm going to get a little gray circle that you can see just there. And if I click on a space in the map, then it's going to bring up my GIS features. And I'm going to see all the attributes of that. So unlike some products, this isn't a sync. This is actually a live view from my GIS database of what's out there at that moment in time. So I'm not synchronizing data necessarily at that point. I'm just visualizing it from within the Maximo window and looking at that GIS data as I go. I've also got the ability to look at results, but to do that, I want to do a query by my attributes first. So I'm going to come here and look at my wastewater mains, and I'm going to select a query maybe by my trunk names because I want to see all the mains that are along a certain line. So I'll put a value in here of Ashland and hit the search button. And what that's going to do is go out and search my GIS. So it's going to do a direct read off of those features. And it's going to bring me back then all of the features in my GIS that match that. So from here, then I can see all the little green push pens that basically run along the street that make up that particular chunk of my mains.
Very nice. And Amy, so if you wanted to, you could look at one of those individually too, not just as a group, right? Within your results?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can look at them individually, or I can look at them as a result. I can kind of lasso and do a subset if I want just an area, around this intersection or something like that. I've got the ability to interact with that at this point.
Very good.
I can also take this list then back to my Maximo list. So I've got a good interaction between taking a list that's in Maximo over to the map, and then I can take a list that's in the map and bring it back to my main asset screen. So I've done that here, and I can scroll through and kind of see. And I noticed one down here that the material type is unknown, but maybe I've got some information from the field and I want to go ahead and edit that and update it to show that this is a concrete main. So I click on my little edit icon up there, and then I can get the list of the feature attributes. Again, I'm interacting directly with my GIS at this point, so I can switch out the material and change that from unknown to concrete. And once I close this and save that, it's going to go ahead and send that update live back over to the GIS. And of course, if I've got a round trip there, a lot of these descriptions will be formed from my GIS. So once I make that update in the GIS, then that would trigger the GIS to send that information back and therefore update my Maximo records to reflect any attribute changes that have been made. So some other things I can do with this list, and I can't really see it because I think it's hidden behind us, but I can create work orders from this. So are you sure you want to create a work order? I'm going to say yes. And then it's going to prompt me to take me to the work order tracking application, where I can then interact with the work order itself, just like you normally would. So add a description, maybe to go out and inspect this trunk, put in work types and priorities and GLs and any other information that you might want to enter. But if I scroll down, then what I'm going to see is that all of the assets, the 19 main sections that were on my query, have come over here to my work order. So that's kind of how Spatial works in a nutshell. Tom, Lani, did you guys have anything else that you want me to kind of zoom back to, or that we wanted to highlight in that?
Yeah, there are a lot of functions and features that can be done from the map as well. I noticed that you created a work order from the list tab, but there's also abilities to configure Maximo. You could create the work order from the map, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah, definitely, because we would have the map tips. So pretty much any of the actions that you would have in your select action menu here over on the left, you can tie those into map tips and interact with them straight from the map view as well. So enter meter readings, view work details, create work orders, create service requests, all those types of things would be available to you.
Yeah, that's a really nice feature, just to be able to stay on the map and perform actions that you normally would have to go back to the Maximo, to the asset record to do. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, with that, you can also switch to a different asset right there on the screen and, just take it right to the Maximo information on that asset.
Right.
Yep. So that's a little bit about what Spatial is. As we kind of talk about that, I think let's talk a little bit about how it works. So, that all looked really simple from the front end, but Tom, you're the guy who gets the phone call when Lani and I come up with all our crazy use cases with clients and say, oh yeah, sure, we can do that, not a problem. And then I call Tom, I'm like, hey, Tom, listen, I just promised a client this. Can you make that happen? So let's talk a little bit about, how does Spatial work?
Right, absolutely. So what we have here is actually, this is a Maximo Spatial in proxy mode. Like I don't know if we just didn't look at this close enough. Maybe we should edit it for our next one. But so we only have the line going from Maximo to the monitor, but you were just talking about how the it was a direct link into ArcGIS, and that's true. So there should actually be an arrow from the monitor to the ArcGIS system. So this is running in proxy mode. If you don't know what that is, in Map Manager, there's a little button that you can check, and basically all the requests from ArcGIS go through the Maximo database, and that is how it's presented to the user. But if that's not checked, then you directly talk to Maximo. And
we typically don't recommend the proxy mode, right? Because it can create some performance issues and things like that.
It kind of burdens the Maximo server a little bit, so you don't necessarily always want to do that. But there are some
reasons
weird scenarios where you would want to have that in place.
Sure.
So anyway, you connect to Maximo, you can get to your asset, and then from there, you are going to get if you wanted to just view it, you're going to have a map service that is going to bring up the GIS features. So
Tom, what is it that Maximo has to do? Can you explain a little bit what does Maximo need, right, in order to have this integration work? What does it need from GIS, and then what are the pieces and parts in Maximo that kind of put it all together for you?
Well, at its root, we just need a map service URL that connects from Maximo, or that you would input into Maximo's map manager.
Okay.
And then you can display that map service. Now, if you want to be able to edit that feature service, which commonly we do if we want to add our assets in or our locations in from GIS, we're going to add a feature service as well. So that will allow us to be able to make edits to the feature. And at its basic level, we're going to add an asset number from Maximo and a site ID from Maximo, or a location number, depending on which object you want. or which one you're doing.
So we're kind of talking about the fact that, I mean, in two different scenarios in my mind is, so GIS has a lot of information that Maximo would love to have, right?
Sure.
All that beautiful attribution and everything about the GIS assets, and Maximo would like to have that. So in one scenario, GIS has all the asset information, and Maximo wants to bring that over into Maximo so that typical asset management and maintenance and things like that can occur on those assets. And the other scenario is Maximo has the same assets as GIS, but they're not talking to each other. They don't each know the same things about those assets. So you want to link those assets to the GIS and Maximo so that it is the same, one and the same. So just, can you talk a little bit about the fact that what causes them to be able to be linked, and how when you look at an asset in Maximo and you go to the map, how that just magically says, oh, that's that asset in GIS?
Well, there's a lot of stuff happening behind the screen, Lani. So like,
yeah, I get that.
So you've got to configure a lot of pieces. So you've got your map manager, and that's your basic URLs about your map and some certain settings for your map. And then that can link to your JSON mapping, which is going to tell, it's basically going to take JSON data and translate that into Maximo data. And that is all tied together, the cron task, or it's tied together with the cron task. So the map manager and the JSON mapping, you put it into you take it and you create a cron task. And the cron task is going to have a query into GIS, another URL, and it's going to say what assets need updated or what assets need created. And then that is what's going to create the record, update the record, and add the linking fields, as we call them. So like we use MX attributes a lot. So this is a attribute that you add to GIS that says MX asset num, and MX loc num, MX site ID. And so you use your primary keys from Maximo and you add them to GIS. And once you go,
that's the link.
That's the link. That's the magic. That's how it happens, right?
Okay.
So once you go into your asset record, you click on the linked asset and you go to the map, and automatically it's going to pop up. It's going to say, hey, this asset's linked.
I found a match. Yeah.
It's going to highlight it. It's going to make it extremely visible for you, and then you can interact further.
That's awesome. It's very awesome.
So no, a lot of times we use the asset num and site ID or location and site ID as the links, but we've used other fields as well. So global IDs, the GUIDs, some custom fields. Right. I mean, we have some options for that. It's not, doesn't have to be a one size fits all. It's not constrained.
No, you find a lot of customers. There's a lot of data protection, like so. Maximo's mine. GIS is yours, and like sometimes they don't necessarily want people touching their stuff. So you Maximo wants the asset, so they bring in like a global ID or something from GIS, and they link on that field instead. And that works too. Like it just, as long as you know what they are, you can link on it.
Yeah, both. Yeah, exactly.
It does need to be contained in both systems, though.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Is
there has to be an ID for both.
It's got to, it's got to be an ID, and it's got to exist in both places, because that's what creates that hook of knowing that those two records are related to each other.
Right, and the JSON mapping is just that matching of the attribute data to each other, so that we know what we're sending over and what we want to get back.
Right.
What that data stream needs to contain. Right.
Right. So it's just your data mapping. Like if you were going to import data from one system into the other, this just does it more as a continually evolving effort, because you're always going to be adding assets. You're always going to be adding locations. Sure. And making changes to those assets and locations. And so this is a great way for us to be able to update that. So
you mentioned the import kind of thing, or if you were going to import. So what kind of communication method do Maximo and GIS use to communicate?
Well, it uses a REST endpoint. So just like a, just like you could set up any other integration at Maximo.
Sure.
I mean, at its heart, that's what this is. You just get
Right.
to be able to visualize your assets on a map. I mean,
Yeah, and for those who saw Maximo Spatial back in the day, right, or even some of the pre-spatial integrations that we tried to do with Maximo and other NGIS in years gone by, back then it was all database links, and you had to have the databases
True.
together and communicating, and you had to be able to query directly. And now with the modern technologies and the REST services, it's much more friendly and yeah, and not so, sort of invasive or whatever to the database level. So
that's been a big help to some of our clients. I know we've had some folks that have switched between Oracle and SQL Server or vice versa. And so back when it was all database linked, I mean, databases had to be the same type of database. We often had to co-locate them just to not have database links going across servers and things like that. So moving off of the database level linkage to the REST APIs has really been a big help. For that. And then also, I think, Tom, it's using the integration framework as well, right? I know there's a lot of and things like that. So there's options within just the traditional MIF to set up some.
Right, because you're still setting, you're still using the, there's custom out of the box, or well, there's out of the box. Sorry, custom out of the box. Yeah.
I like that.
Well, they're custom for Maximo Spatial. How about that? So they've created some objects, integration objects delivered. So integration objects, enterprise service, external system, all with their own class files and everything like that. And they deliver those out of the box, and you can customize them, or you can use them just as they are out of the box. And configure, right.
Customize is a bad word.
It's got a stigma to it, but it's not,
You're right, it does.
Sometimes it's necessary.
So it does. It uses a lot of the MIF pieces.
Yeah.
So you got to keep that in sync.
That's all that stuff behind the screen you were talking about.
That's it.
Yeah.
A lot of magic behind that screen.
A lot of it. Well, thanks, Tom. That's super helpful. But before we go on, we're going to talk about some use cases here in a minute, like where we've actually deployed this magic and seen it work, and it is in production today. But we want to take a quick poll with our audience. Alex, could you bring up our poll, please?
Yes, thanks, Lani. And now that we've talked a little bit about what Spatial is and how it works, we'd love to hear who's using it or thinking about using it. So we'd love to hear from you. Look in your chat window and you'll see the poll if you want to share with us. Are you using it today? Are you, as Lani said, you go way back? Or you can feel free to add additional comments in the chat box as well. Boy, it looks like the audience is a little bit all over the map in utilization and evaluation.
Yes, some folks are implementing. That's awesome. And also in production. That's great. Cool.
Great.
I see there's a few that have spatial licenses but haven't implemented yet. And spatial's included with some of the industry solutions. I know utilities has it, and I think one or two of the other ones does, as well as just as an add-on product. So.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, but if you didn't get a chance to answer or you want to add, for example, why you haven't implemented it, but you have it and you're interested, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. Thanks all. Back to you, Amy.
Yeah, thanks for the poll.
Thank you, Alex. So let's talk about some use cases. So not to date any of us, but Lani did mention that we've been working with maps and Maximo since before Spatial was even a thing, and have been through some of the early years of Spatial as it stabilized and got to where it is today. So lots of fun use cases, lots of interesting challenges that we've solved for clients. So just a couple of ideas there. Inspections is a pretty common one. You've got a guy out in the field, or actually saw one of the questions in the chat regarding, the demo we did was sewer mains. Obviously, those are field assets. There was a question in the chat related to doing stuff in building. And we have done that as well. We've got some folks who have Spatial deployed for their, basically they have their floor plans in GIS and all their room configurations and things like that. And so inspections, whether they're custodial or life safety inspections or out in the field, we've done a lot with gas leak survey, vegetation, different things like that. So that ability to be out in the field, and that kind of hits the first two together. So you've got a mobile device and you're collecting points of geometry and tying them into some existing work order or creating new work orders to identify, where things need attention. If something's not failing, and if something's failing in inspection, or even just gathering meter data and other things like that. So inspections are definitely one of our bigger use cases. Lani, you've got anything to add on that one?
Well, the cool thing about spatial and inspections is that, if you're able, and I'll go ahead and kind of move in a little bit into the mobile use case too, because from a field perspective, field folks tend to have mobile devices, and their ability to not only find the asset they're looking for based on some sort of mapping capability and right in front of their right on their device, but they're also able to pin their own location. So should they find something in the field that is maybe not on their list of things to do today, but it is something that needs to be addressed, they can actually drop a pin on the map right there from using their devices located them. So there you go. You've got a drop right where that issue is occurring. And from there, Maximo can monitor that. GIS and Maximo can monitor that and take action on those kinds of things, like create work orders and create follow-ups and make notifications for follow-up work. So yeah, the inspections and mobile go hand in hand. And as far as spatial on the mobile, some of you might be wondering, like, how does that work? I'm carrying around, you use Google Maps for everything. Let's go eat. Where are we going to go eat? Let's look at what's near us if we're hungry. But with a asset management program, you need to have access to your own maps, right? Your actual asset management maps. So one of the cool things about the Maximo mobile product in particular would be that the maps go with you, right? So the ability to be disconnected or connected, but you still have a copy of your GIS map locally and you can sync whenever you get back into a connected state. And the ability for and that's available, actually, Maximo Mobile is available with maps in the 7.6, Maximo 7.6 environment, as well as obviously the new Maximo Asset Suite, the 8.4, the new MAS product. But the whole idea around location-based services, right? It's just that, the location is everything, and if you know where you are, it's much better to document and update your maps. The other thing about, I just can't stop kind of thinking about the fact that you are out in the world, and it's that idea of contribute. You're contributing to your data for your company. You are gathering information from the geographic location where you are standing on the earth, while visualizing on a map what else there might be nearby, because you're able to see your assets in Maximo and then visually on the map. So mobile is definitely, when it comes to spatial, a hot topic and a very valuable tool.
And it goes beyond that. So, you've got the guys in the field, but even the folks back in the office. I know we've had situations, customer service gets a call, customer wants to know if there's a crew in their neighborhood, emergency response type activities. If you've got a high priority issue, where's the nearest crew? For a long time, it was the purview of GIS to do a lot of the network modeling and tracing and things like that. Being able to expose some of that within your asset management system is really nice. We did a project just last year, and Tom, you worked on this one with me. It was a disaster response project for a transmission utility. So when they have any sort of storms or other disasters go through, tornadoes, flooding, et cetera, being able to graphically and spatially see what lines are out, what the restoration progress is, where the crews are, who to dispatch next. All of that's a really nice feature for them for that disaster response, being able to model all the transmission lines and structures and make some assessments on where things are and what the most effective and efficient route to restoration might be. So
that's true. And another one that comes to mind on a use case is when electric utilities need to hire contractors to do their vegetation management, right? So you have a contractor who can actually, document what they trimmed, what they sprayed, what they cleared, and then using some kind of mobile data gathering device that talks to GIS, then Maximo can become aware of that work that was completed. So there's just having that field and the field capability, as well as the knowing where the geographic location of things really does enhance just the asset management world.
Absolutely. So we've also got the asset swap and scripting up there. So asset swap is always kind of an interesting thing, as well as pipe splitting. That's another one we run into a lot. And there's different ways that the GIS models data, particularly linear assets and things that are polygons, and always some conversation about how do we address that. If a pipe gets split, or if a new branch comes in on a line, how do we mimic that? There's integrations between the dynamic segmentation on the GIS side and linear asset management on the Maximo side. We've looked at that with some clients. And the scripting tools, I think, Tom, you can speak to this, have really opened up a lot of capabilities there for some of that automagic activity. Because in the past, particularly if it was database driven, but even in the early stages where they were moving away from the database, but the scripting engines weren't as good as they are now, we didn't have as many options. So now, with the auto create capabilities, with the ability to just dynamically call the REST services straight out of a script on an attribute or a launch point, or an object launch point kind of a thing. I mean, there's so many nice things we can do now that we didn't used to be able to do. And I think we've been able to do some kind of fun stuff and more dynamically interacting both with the map and just in keeping the data in sync.
Yeah, I mean, just listening to the gas inspections and the disaster recovery, we're able to put a point, on in the mobile application, and once that point's in there, we can generate a work order off of that, and then we know exactly where it is, and there's other information that's being captured, like what the problem is, if it's a structure issue, if it's a line issue, the gas leak, okay, we're going to send our crew out, we're going to have them prepared, and we're going to be able to get that out there, which is amazing. So, and we're just doing that automatically through scripting. And so, you can put the point in, bam, there automatically there's a work order for the crew that's ready to be assigned. So there's no real waiting, and especially in the disaster recovery, that's every second counts.
Sure.
You got 1,000 people without power and 1,000 people calling you wanting their power back.
Right.
So anything we can do to help reduce that time. But it goes even further than that to monitoring the life cycles of assets. Like we've got things like Maximo kind of gives you that opportunity to put things on a single feature, so but what happens when that feature actually moves to a different feature? So like you have abandoned pipelines or something like that. So and that that one kind of tends to happen in GIS, but I could see where it could happen from the Maximo side too. So basically the feature goes from the pipeline to the abandoned pipeline, and then the MX creation set by one, and then automatically picked up by the cron task. And we have the asset number. Remember, we added that before, or we have an identifier, so we can go out into Maximo and automatically change the feature class on that asset, because we broke the link in GIS by removing it. So now we're going to fix it by bringing in that cron task and updating the feature class. And conversely, we've done similar scripting with work orders. So we have a client that had, they have work orders, and they have feature layers based, query feature layers based on status. So you have your waiting approval work orders on future work orders. You have your in progress work orders on current work order feature, and you have your historical work orders on your closed work orders on a historical feature.
All right.
So the trick is that in GIS, it's a query. So if you think about that like a view of, like activities and tasks only shows you, the WO activity table only shows you activities and tasks. It's kind of the same thing. So you have work orders only in waiting approval status on the future work order. But what happens when Maximo sends the notice that it's going to change to an approved status or an in progress status? Well, that's going to kind of break that link. So through scripting, we're able to keep that in sync so that if that status changes, we're automatically going to change the feature class to the future work order status.
So it shows on the right layer, right?
So it shows on the right layer and doesn't break the link.
Yeah,
and you turn that layer off because that completed work layer gets really, really cluttered over time. So it's nice to be able to turn those on and off. So.
Yeah, and back to the whole abandoned asset thing. For pipes, it's it's important because not all companies, they'll abandon in place is a very legitimate way of managing that asset. But if I'm digging in the field and I hit something, right? Is it
was there?
Yeah, it's a way to still document that there's still stuff in the ground, right? So I want to go back to the asset swap. Do we have time for me to go back to the asset swap?
Yeah, a few minutes, and we'll move on and talk about some lessons learned before we go to the questions.
So it may just have been something that you may be thinking about. So asset swap in Maximo, right? We do it a lot of different ways. Folks do it a lot of different ways, but a recent use case we had is where, because GIS is now very involved in the asset knowledge of what Maximo has, an asset swap in Maximo means, okay, we need to update GIS as well. So a recent solution we did is with an asset swap function in the Maximo system would kick off a script to go look up the current asset in GIS, the matching one that we talked about earlier, and then update that asset with the new asset that was created in Maximo that matched that particular function or location in GIS. So that was a pretty cool solution that we put in for a client recently, and keeps everybody up to date on what's occurring, right? So that was neat that we did the one we did there.
And that's a good launch point into some of the lessons learned, because I know with the asset swaps, with the fact that GIS edit rules are often very different from Maximo edit rules. So with Maximo, once anything's got sort of a transaction history or related records or something, you can't delete it. There's a lot of status transactional history that's stored in Maximo over the asset's life or the work order's life. And typically GIS doesn't have that same level of transactional history. It's easy to move things from one feature class to another. It's easy to just delete features. So that can wreak havoc in that linkage if we don't plan for that appropriately. So I know we've created entire processes around what happens when a feature gets deleted in Maximo. So maybe it's not, or gets deleted in GIS. So it's not abandoned and placed, it's just removed. But we've got a work history. We can't just delete that in Maximo. So how do we handle that? Or with the abandonment, Tom, you were just talking about, typically that's not only updating the feature, it's updating some status history. It might be inactivating some PMs. There's a lot of tentacles that reach out. So I think from a lessons learned perspective, one of the big one is just understanding your processes, both on the GIS side and the Maximo side, and where those two marry together, and then planning for that, and planning, how do we want to handle these? What are we going to do with query definition layers? What are we going to do when we abandon things or delete things? Or work backlog is another one. I know a lot of clients really struggle with their GIS group to keep as-built current. So, there's work that's getting done in the field today that may not even be represented in the GIS for another couple of weeks, or in worst case, maybe a couple months. So there's a lot of things around that, around the process and just understanding, where you are. So what are some of the other things you guys have seen with that have been kind of lessons learned or gotchas that, fortunately for us as a consulting firm, every time we learn a lesson, we're able to take that lesson forward to the next client we work with. And over the last 10, 15 years, we've learned a lot of lessons that we've been able to take forward. But what are some that stick with you guys that have happened over time?
Well, I'll start with the planning. So back sort of like at the drawing board, right? There is a desire to integrate two systems, GIS and Maximo. So we know that we want to do it, and you really have to ask some questions. You've got to ask why.
Yeah.
Why do you want to do it? What is the value that you hope to achieve with that integration? And the ability to document and define, what the expectation is at the end. Like any project, what is the expected? How will we know that this project was a success? And what do I visualize happening with these two systems, all the way from an executive level, like what kind of knowledge or understanding or reporting or metrics can I gain from this, all the way down to that individual walking around with a tablet and trying to perform their work. So you've got to think about the needs and the expectations at every level when you're first planning out a spatial integration. I mean, it's as simple. Sometimes it's, people think it's simple as, oh no, I just need to know these features in GIS need to be in Maximo, and that's all integration is. But there's more, right? There's more. So we do have to agree, like, what's the source of truth? If there's conflicting information, which system owns that particular data around an asset or a location or a work order. And then the second part of planning goes into prioritizing. Some of the spatial demos that you see and that are some of the things we've even talked about today, there's a lot you can do. So we want to talk about how the most important things get done first. We keep our wish list going, but let's make sure that the actual need, what we need to do is done, and we prioritize that so that we're not competing priorities during a project.
That's
another
a
thing
great point. I think some of our most successful implementations have started out with just a handful of key features and to be used as a prototype and pilot, and then they've grown from there.
Exactly. And sometimes just to get the concept of, I didn't know we could do this. That means we can expand, right? Once you see what is there. So, and then another thing to be kind of cognizant of or aware of or prepared for in planning is you need to have GIS and Maximo need to go for a checkup, right? So we've got to make sure that they're all healthy. We got to check versions. We've got to check fix packs. We got to look at database for lots of different things. Just make sure that, that they're compatible. And we're going to be, have a friendly conversation there. So that's something they'll have to be done, as well as truly understanding the depth of skill sets and stuff you have in both Maximo and GIS. How much can your team actually contribute to the project and assist, or do we need other kinds of resources to help with that? And then just the understanding. The other thing is that I'm going to keep going on. There's so many. I'll just give you the bullets. The understanding of the organization, how you know your own data and how you love your own data and how you care for your own data is very important. So you need to be very honest with yourself around that, because it's going to come back to haunt you, what is there or what is not there, right? Also process changes, that is just this world, changes in process, comes with new implementations or enhancements. Mm-hmm. Selecting the right devices for the field is another thing that comes up quite a bit on planning, and sometimes left to the very end, and that's, can be difficult. But, at the end of the day, you get that powerful, rich interaction between, everybody who uses maps in the field today, mixed with all that great asset management analysis and work order history and such right there at your fingertips with them both on the same screen. So that's my piece on planning.
Tom, what about you? Lessons learned? I think we might be carrying the current record for most number of IBM cases developed on Spatial. I'm not sure if that's a badge of honor or something else, but you've been behind a lot of those cases and have worked really closely with the dev team on the IBM side, and they've been fantastic to work with. I don't mean to diss IBM in any means, but we found a lot of stuff. So, what are some of your lessons learned and takeaways from your technical side?
I mean, what's funny about you saying the cases, those I learn a lot from those just because of what IBM asks for and what is returned, and sometimes it's rather quick, sometimes it's not. I mean, there's some that have been open for months. There's some, they can turn around in 2 weeks, just be like, because I've seen it before, or the APAR is already created and the fix pack is already out there, or however that works out. But even just working with Lani, was it last Friday? You called me and, hey, this client, the maps aren't working like how I expect, and I got a demo on Monday. I'm like, all right, well, let me dig in and look. And like everything you threw at me was something that I had seen before. So like they didn't have a base map set up yet. So we put on the base map, and that's an important thing right there. Just there are certain tools that rely on a base map, and that's not something that's necessarily intuitive. Published or intuitive.
It wasn't even intuitive to me. I thought, why wouldn't this work as identify?
Right. You've got your GIS layer. Why wouldn't it work? Right. Yeah, but just and that was a case that I had opened last year sometime, and it's just like, well, that's weird. But so it was I mean, just being able to react to stuff like that after those cases is amazing. One of the other things is your layers need to be all on the same coordinate system. And, so WGS 84 seems to be the standard. Google, Bing, and OpenStreetMaps all use that standard. But a lot of clients like to use their own state planes and stuff like that. So that they don't mix well. You end up with a point. You think you're putting the point here in Florida or wherever you are, and then it can end up in India because your base map is on a different
projection,
on a different feature. So or a different projection, right? So it's very important that they all stay on the same projection coordinate system. And with that, like there's certain tools within Maximo that are built around that WGS 40 or WGS 84. So it's important they won't work without it. So definitely take that into consideration if you plan on using a lot of the out-of-the-box spatial tools. What else did we learn? Cheating over here.
Well, while you're cheating, I'm going to look at a couple of the questions in the chat so we can get some of those answered. So one of them, and I know this is a lesson you've learned because I know we've had situations with runaway crons and duplicates getting created and things like that. So one of the questions is with the cron task, that could be a huge number of assets every time that cron task runs. So is it possible to limit the number of assets to only the ones modified since the last runtime? So possible to limit? Yes. I know we've run into that. So what's our recommendation there?
I typically, on the big ones, the ones that are going to have a lot of features, and I like to keep the count about 400, 500. So as an initial run, you kind of do to sync them, right? We're going to process 400 every 10 minutes or so, something like that, just to wham bam get them in there. If you go start doing a daily one, that's where it gets a little complicated. So you might have over 400 edits overnight. So you got to kind of find that baseline to say, I'm going to have 400 edits or 600 edits or something like that. So rather than continually running it, every hour or something like that, you can do you could create a second feature or a second cron task that would also have a limit of 400. So you could do 800 and still just
parallel, yeah.
run that cron task overnight. So I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can do to kind of limit it. So anything you can build in the spatial query in ArcGIS and create that URL, you can put into Maximo and use that as your cron task URL query.
Part of the question too was how do you only limit it to what was recently updated, right? So that's another thing, right? We're only going to be looking at anything that's been updated. We're not going to try to sync the whole data set, right? So that's why we use that one flag. We use a flag on one side to indicate to Maximo that this asset has been changed. Yeah.
So we have the MX creation state. So it's kind of misnamed. I think initially it was like, okay, we're only going to add. But over time, we've like, well, we're going to change the attributes. We're going to get to know our assets a little bit better. We thought it was a model number of this, and now it's something else. Or we actually took a look at it, and the model number is not what we expected. So let's edit that. Or there was a typo, something, so and there's all sorts of GIS side stuff that can automatically, if you update these attributes, then trigger the MX creation state to go to 1. Right. So
yeah. And that's another one, just kind of understanding the processes and people. I know you mentioned when you were doing that initial sync and you have a lot of assets coming in, the importance of throttling that. But then, I know we've had folks that have taken those limits off in production because they're like, oh, well, we never update more than, 50 assets a day. That'll never be a problem until some GIS process runs that updates everything. And then all of a sudden you come in the next morning and you had 80,000 records processed the night before. And of course there was no limit on it and everything.
And Maximo's hosed, GIS is hosed, and we need this back up ASAP.
Happened, but you could.
No, so never happened.
Yeah.
So Amy, I see a question in the chat around the spatial integration for interior assets and locations. I know that we talk a lot about pipes in the ground and wires in the air and the like, but can you talk a little bit about some of the stuff we've done in that area?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And historically, we do think about the pipes in the ground and the wires in the air, but we've got some clients that are using spatial for their interior spaces. Again, modeling floor plans, access, the emergency access and egress type activities, security cameras, paging systems, things like that. So assets that are kind of physically dispersed within that space, using them to do routes around custodial inspections or health safety inspections, those types of things. One of the interesting challenges with that is, unless you're in a single floor building, when you start looking at that, you're looking at things both on an X and Y and a Z plane. So we've got some folks who have configured their layers within their GIS to be by floor of the building. So if I'm looking for issues on the 3rd floor, I can just go into my layers tool within my map view in Maximo and turn on the 3rd floor, but leave the 1st and 2nd and 4th floors off, so that I only see that kind of vertical slice of the building. So there's some things there. And then even on the interior, as far as more looking at mechanical equipment and plumbing equipment, we've got a GIS partner that we work with quite a bit that we're working on some 3D modeling. So where they've done LiDAR scans and created 3D GIS models of their interior spaces and some of the mechanical equipment and things, being able to display those and do that same type of linkage there that you would have if that pipe was in the ground versus in the wall. So, which is a little different than a BIM model. It's not BIM, it's 3D GIS, which is it's a similar tool, but a different architecture and foundation behind it. So lots of fun stuff there on the inside of the building, which is not traditionally what people think of when they think spatial, but definitely there's a lot of use cases there And again, you've got the wayfinding and the GIS knowing where you are, relies on a little different technology there than when you're out in the open and maybe using GPS satellites and things for that location device. There's some interior space locating tools that you can use as well. So some fun stuff going on with that.
It is fun. Yep, lots of good stuff.
So let's see, new features in Maximo 8 Spatial versus Maximo 7. So Lani and I have had the opportunity to be playing around in Maximo 8 or Mass managed lately. And, really Mass 8 for the most part is 7612 in a new technology framework with the Red Hat and OpenShift and things like that. There are quite a few changes around the integrations and integration framework with the Kafka queues and some of that kind of stuff. But I think at its core, Spatial is pretty stable, and a lot of the same features that you see in 7612 will carry forward to Maximo 8. I don't know, Lani, if you've seen anything specific on that, or Tom, if you have. I think it's mostly around the architecture changes and not so much the user experience from a spatial perspective. Obviously, Mass 8 looks pretty different than what we're used to with 7.6.
It does, and I'm not expecting Spatial to really behave any differently. I mean, from an end user standpoint, right. I mean, it's a map tab in your Maximo, and it's your GIS data showing. So I don't have any angst about it. Knowing IBM, they're going to be doing some things, right? Because they keep doing things, and so we always monitor and pay attention to those things as they come up.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are just about out of time. I know the video will be available. So for those of you that have coworkers that didn't get to watch this, you can definitely go back and watch the replay, or if there's some pieces that we covered that you want to listen to again, you can do that. If there's anything we can follow up with, Pam's information is here. So you can definitely reach out to the marvelous Pam Denny, and she can answer your questions or get you in touch with us if you've got more questions. Any final thoughts, Tom, as we close up for today?
No, I think it's been pretty great.
Good. All right.
Yeah, on to the next one, right?
Yeah.
Right. The next
Lani,
thing.
anything else that you wanted to add?
No, just thank everybody for attending, and please reach out
Yes.
if you need to or need more info.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for being here. It was fun to chat with you for a few minutes, or chat at you, I guess, is really kind of the more important thing. But we've had a good time presenting this, and Lani and Tom on our team are awesome. Love working with them, and they've certainly got a wealth of experience, as does the rest of our bench that backs them up on our projects. So we appreciate everybody's time joining us. And Alex, I will turn it back over to you.
Great. That was so much information. I appreciate how much you all packed into just an hour. Thanks, Amy, Lani, and Tom. As Amy mentioned, we'll be sharing a copy of the recorded session, so we'll be following up. If you have any questions, please contact the always amazing Pam Denny, or our team will be reaching out as well. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.